Good day, everyone, and I hope everyone is going to enjoy the conference. My apologies for not being there in person. But King 5 was issued on the basis that King 4 was doing the necessary job, but the King Committee found that SMMEs were not following the technical language in King 4. And also the ultimate consumer having oversight over their supply chains were finding it difficult to see whether the supplier was acting as a responsible corporate citizen. So the whole purpose behind King 5 was simplification of what was in King 4. And it's been divided into 4 sections: the foundational concepts, the code itself, the principles, a glossary explaining the terms in clear, concise, and understandable language and not in technical language. And the 4th one is a disclosure template, so you can fill in that you've complied with the international best practice in order to achieve one of the 13 principles of the code, or you haven't, and then set out what you have done in your endeavor to achieve that principle. So the background to King 4, which essentially is in King 5, but in this form of 4 areas to try and simplify the matter for smaller companies, and also to make the oversight by the ultimate consumer over their supply chain to make sure they're not acting in an irresponsible manner, which can affect the value, the market capitalization if it is a listed company, on a stock exchange if it is discovered. So the background is that in the towards the end of the 19th century, wealthy families were reluctant to make capital available to start new businesses because, as owners, if the business had failed, they became liable still to the creditors and the employees, etc. But the political leaders of the day said that it was absolutely necessary to create more jobs because that's for their voters. And the academia of the day, intelligentsia, thought, why don't we, the government, statutorily create a company which has legal personality, although it will be incapacitated because it has no heart, no mind, and no conscience. And we'll have a governance architecture whereby directors are appointed to steer the company. And we will make an initial public offering for shares. In other words, we will issue, let's say, 100,000 shares of £1 each, and open it up to the public to participate or not. And these would be the original subscribers, each pay £1 and get, in those days, a hard copy share certificate. And the company would then have its capital to buy the business which was set out in the initial public offering. And the directors would then start appointing the shareholders, the original subscribers, would start appointing the directors. Now, what happened was that those subscribers, members of wealthy families, picked relatives, uncles, aunts, cousins, brothers, sisters, to be directors of the company. And this led to a fallacious conclusion by other stakeholders that the shareholders were the owners of the company. Now, the attributes of ownership are that if I own a pen, for example, I can break it, I can give it to anyone, I can throw it away, I can do anything I like with it. Shareholders do not have any of those attributes of ownership of the assets of the company. The assets and liabilities of the company are the assets and liabilities of the company. That's a major tenet of the limited liability company, that shareholders have no duty or responsibility to the company. But the concomitant is that if the business of the company fails, they go to the back of the queue in trying to recover whatever money is available from, let's say, an auctioning of its assets. First of all, creditors are first in the queue, especially secured creditors and preferred creditors by way of statute, such as the receiver of revenue. Then you have employees, and then you have your shareholders if there's anything left. But this myth of shareholder ownership was debunked. Work done by Cornell University and Harvard showed clearly that they were not the owners, that the trading of shares, once companies became listed on stock exchanges, showed that only about 15% of the shareholders were original subscribers. The rest had become secondary market shareholders. In other words, the original subscribers had sold their shares to other persons, and those had sold on to other persons. And the consequence was that those secondary market shareholders hadn't even contributed a penny to the capital of the company. But towards the end of the 20th century, it was discovered by way of research, particularly in America and the United Kingdom, that the financial statements, which were being reported in an annual report according to two main standards, the International Accounting Standards Board of the International Financial Reporting Standards Board and Financial Accounting Standards Board of America, two main standards. There are other standards, but they're not material. And research of those standards showed that only about 20% of the makeup of the market capitalization of companies, that is, the number of shares issued times the market price, was being reflected in the financial statements. This resulted in my, then as chairman of the United Nations on Governance and Oversight, having meetings with the International Federation of Accountants. And we came to three major conclusions. The first is financial reporting, the financial statements, profit and loss, etc., was critical to disclose, but not sufficient to discharge the duty of accountability, because the directors were then not reporting on 80% of value, made up of what was then called the non-financial aspects, morphed into ESG issues, and today called the sustainability issues of the company. The result was that many NGOs and NPOs started drafting standards to try and report on these so-called non-financial aspects. And I said in London at a meeting held with the executives of these NGOs and NPOs drafting standards that it was a disgrace that they were not collaborating, that it was a social outrage because they were all fishing from the same ponds to get money to develop their standards. And really, there should be a consolidation of their efforts. And this happened. And the one Sustainability Accounting Standards Board looked at sustainability from the point of the influence of the economy, society, and the environment from the outside onto the company. So, for example, economically, the collapse of Lehman Brothers or the GFC had a huge impact on limited liability companies from a value point of view when those incidents occurred. But inside the company, how the company produces its product impacts on those three critical pillars for sustainability development, namely economically, socially, and environmentally. So you will see sustainability is both impacting inside out and from the outside in. Consequently, dealing with both those factors has now been labeled as double materiality. And if you look at simply the impact of those three critical pillars for sustainable development from the outside in, and look at the financial outcomes of that, that's single materiality. King 5 adopts the view that the approach should be one of double materiality, both outside in and inside out. And it looks at the value creation model rather than the model of the primacy of the shareholder because of the mythical belief that they were the owners of the company, which prevailed right through the 20th century, with the consequence that profit was made but was subsidized by society and the environment. So this thinking was actually in silos because it was thinking merely of the financial outcomes, when there were both social and environmental outcomes by the way our companies were performing or acting. And the concept of that operationally, companies integrate these resources or the capitals used by them, financial, manufactured, human, intellectual, natural assets, and of course, social relationships between the various stakeholders. So integrated thinking became the chosen model that really, in making a business judgment call on behalf of the company, the directors individually and collectively as a board should think through the three prisms of the economy, society, and the environment in making a business judgment call. And today, it's quite extraordinary that there are agenda items on boards of directors which were never there before, such as inputs to outcomes, stakeholder relationships, IT governance and cybersecurity, which has become critical with AI development, supply chain governance, because you have to make sure that your supplier is acting as a responsible corporate citizen, otherwise it impacts on the value of your company as the ultimate consumer, risks and opportunities of climate change, and of course today the geopolitical issues. So how to measure whether a company has in fact practiced good governance? What we said in King 4 was that there are 4 outcomes. And if you achieve these 4 outcomes, then it can be said that the company has been practicing good governance. An ethical culture with effective leadership. The directors have acted as guardians of the company's assets and its business affairs. and fulfilling those duties to the company of good faith, care, skill, and diligence. Secondly, the company has created value, but in a sustainable manner, not degrading the planet further or acting contrary to the interests of society. Thirdly, there are adequate and effective controls in order to produce your product. This becomes important from the internal audit point of view, creating systems on how to do it. And internal audit has become absolutely critical in modern governance because it's moved from a hindsight profession, have a system, it's breached, corrected, insight, trying to advise the executive committee on new systems to cope with their thinking. But now it deals with foresight. What are the challenges facing the company? And what should be the systems developed by the internal auditors for the company to successfully produce its product in a sustainable manner? So the phrase has been used by my colleague Rainier, lens of the gardeners of governance, the internal auditor, and directors of the guardians, and those internal auditors are the gardeners in creating or growing these systems, which are now looking at the future and not only hindsight. So King 4 is divided into 4 areas. The foundational concepts, which are the 4 outcomes, which I've described to you in King 4, are the foundational concepts in the first sector of King 5. The second sector of King 5 is the compliance issue, that have you adopted the recommended best international practices, which are linked to each principle in King 5, and a disclosure template has been developed in King 5, where you can say, mark yes, but exception, no, I haven't, but explain how the company has adopted a practice to try and meet that principle. Then there's a glossary of terms, taking these technical terms used in, and which I've used in my talk, in King 4, and made them defined them in clear, concise, and understandable language. So there's a glossary of terms. And so there's the foundational concepts, there's the code itself, which deals with 13 principles and not 17. And the principles are good and effective governance, leading as if you were a guardian of the company's assets and its business affairs, that you were acting with absolute intellectual honesty in making your business judgment calls. You are ensuring that you have, objectively speaking, all the facts to enable you to make that judgment call in the long-term best interests of the health of the company. But need to understand the interests and expectations of your stakeholders. So in all fairness, you can explain to them why you made that decision, even though it's more beneficial to one stakeholder than another. So King 5, the purpose of King 5 was to simplify that which was created in King 4 and to make it easier for SMMEs to follow the code and for ultimate, maybe listed consumers to have oversight over their supply chain and other stakeholders connected to the company to ensure they are practicing good governance so it doesn't impact on the company. For example, if the ultimate company is a company that produces dresses, that gets its fabric from a factory in Indonesia, and Indonesia is using child labor in order to reduce expenditure. When that becomes known, the manufacturer of dresses, which has got an international brand and listed on the London Stock Exchange, could, and there are instances, lose up to 50% of its market capitalization on trading in that day. So the purpose of King 5 was to simplify the concepts of King 4 and hopefully make it easier for organizations to follow and the tenets of King 5. So I hope you enjoy your conference, and Rainier will speak after me. We'll link this concept of guardianship and being gardeners of governance. Thank you very much.